You are about to witness one of the strangest, most unsettling games of chess ever played. Our protagonist is chess's very own mad villain, 500 ELO Chad, and he somehow is playing against a 1900 rated opponent. Oh, and by the way, this username is a lie. He's literally 115 ELO. Let's get right into this abomination. It starts with H4. Yeah, when you're playing as black and you see that your opponent plays a move like H4 or A4, you want to strike the center with E5 immediately. Our 1900 doesn't do that. Instead, he hops in his knight, it's fine. Chad continues his ultimate display of chess knowledge by playing H5. If you find yourself in this position as black, do not panic. Again, just play E5, strike the center. If you really want to develop your knight, you can do that too. But definitely don't play a move like knight G4, because now all white has to do is play E4 and you're borderline lost because you just randomly moved your knight twice in the opening. Chad is a genius, so of course he plays E4. No, he plays H6. This is a miss because you have to play a move like E4 here and then you'll end up bulldozing black. But somehow I think our 1900 is super cocky, so what does he play? Knight H2. I have literally no way of explaining this next move. Chad does not take the knight, instead he plays knight F3. Okay, so black can now take this knight with check and they're just totally fine. But why would you ever do that if you could keep your knight blundered and instead play a move like knight C6? And what does Chad do? Does he take this knight with the knight or the rook? No, now he strikes the center with E4. Now black plays D5 and luckily Chad somehow realizes he can take the knight on H2. Clearly black does not care about that knight, so they play D4. Chad does not care about that knight either, so he continues to march his king up the board. Chad's 1900 rated opponent is clearly not happy with Chad and says, how dare you move your king? I'm gonna do it too. Now Chad plays the unbelievable move B3, and you might be thinking he wants to fianchetto his bishop, but just bear with me for a second. Black responds with E5. Fine. He doesn't want the knight, so like every move he makes is gonna be a blunder because he decides not to save it. Next, Chad decides to play the most explosive move, C4. En passant is now possible. But why do that when you could move your king? Chad says, I could do that too. Now, I want you to pause the video and see if you can find out why Chad played B3 and C4. But first, our opponent decides to blunder his queen. Does Chad take it? No, because he decides to fianchetto his king. King B2. That was the whole reason of B3 C4. Not because this, but just a novelty, I guess? I literally cannot explain the next few moves. Queen E3. Okay, so this queen is attacked twice by these pawns, and I don't think Chad realizes that. Because he plays D3, attacking this queen with the bishop, and maybe he doesn't want to take it, but now he has no choice because if queen D2 check, you'll notice that the king is cut off on A3, so Chad's got to take that queen. And he decides to take it with the knight. Okay, remarkably, Chad is up a full queen against a 1900 rated player. So what does our 1900 rated player decide to do? Will he stop trolling? No way. He moves his king back to E7. Chad decides to push his pawn. Yeah, to A4. What does black do? He brings his king back to the home square. Chad now decides to unleash a full queenside pawn storm for no reason. Black develops a little bit. Chad pushes his pawn, and now black pushes his pawn. And Chad pushes, and black decides to play knight b4. Why does he do this? Well, Chad pushes a pawn, and, well, black plays knight c2. Notice how this position is so terribly lost that Stockfish considers this a good move. Does Chad take it? No way. He puts his knight on the rim, and amazingly, our 1900 player develops his second bishop. The only logical explanation for Chad's next two moves is he feels a little left out, so he hops his knight, blundering it once. His opponent moves the bishop, and then he places his knight in front of the opponent's king too. Now black decides to blunder their bishop for no reason, and again, this is so terribly lost that this is considered a good move by Stockfish. And Chad responds by blundering his queen, and knights move backwards, right? Our 1900 says, no way, I will not be taking your queen. So he blunders his bishop again, but this time in two different ways. And Chad just says, maybe, can you please take it? And he blunders his queen again. Yup, and this is somehow a good move? What? Our 1900 does typical 1900 things and says, no, I do not need your queen to beat you, and takes his knight instead. And Chad says, please take my queen. The 1900 says no. And then Chad literally forces him to. Yup, now Chad randomly decides to go on a world tour with his knight while Black moves his bishop around, and you will not believe what happens next. Black finally moves their knight after 27 moves. This arrived here on move 3. Knight f6, and now my favorite part of the game, f4. Chad does not play f3. That's a W. And now a bunch of random moves to reach one of the most atrocious positions in this game. Almost every single one of Black's pieces is hanging, and this knight is hanging on by a thread. Yeah, but why take any of those pieces when you could move your kings exactly 3 times? Chad decided to demonstrate knight knowledge, so did our 1900, and then he decided to demonstrate knight check knowledge, and Black moved the king. And now an onslaught of more terrible moves are made until Chad decides to push c6, take the pawn, and underpromote to a knight. At this point, I think it's pretty clear that the 1900 is completely trolling and that Chad has absolutely no idea what is going on and is not trolling. Now I'm going to speed through about 13 more incomprehensible moves. If you want to see these moves individually, put the video on half speed, but this will take us to my absolute favorite point in this game. You're not ready for this. Before we move forward, we're going to thoroughly take a look at this position, but we should note that Black has used just over a minute of their time, while Chad has 6 minutes, 17 seconds. Yet, it's move 64, by the way. First, let's highlight this pawn structure. This is absolutely unreal. I have never seen anything like this in my entire life. And typical for this game, almost every piece is hanging. And lastly, look at these kings. This is unbelievable. But the reason I stopped specifically here is to talk about the time used for the rest of this game. Pay attention to Black's time used and Chad's time used. Oh, and there's 11 more moves left. Black instantly moves their bishop, and Chad takes 2 seconds to move his. And then Black pre-moves his rook. Chad takes exactly 1 second to take the f7 pawn, while Black pre-moves their rook. Chad wants to join the fun, so he pre-moves his bishop. Black slows down a bit and takes 2 seconds to move his rook. And then Chad takes 2 seconds to move his bishop. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to pay very close attention to both players' time used during this next 7-move sequence. Look at this. Oh my goodness. Whoa. Chad started that sequence with 6 minutes, 12 seconds. Meanwhile, his 1900 rated opponent had 8 minutes, 48 seconds. Chad moved a lot faster during those 7 moves, meaning I think he's the winner of this game, even if he got mated the next move.